Hey guys, I am Caleb Giddings,
I am Keith Finch.
and you guys are listening or watching Gunday Brunch episode question mark. So today's episode is a fun one. I was texting Keith earlier about this, and I was like, "What if we did a bit on our five favorite gun enthusiast movies?" When you talk about a topic like this, everybody's got opinions, which is what makes it such a fun topic. So what we're going to do is I'm going to name my number five. Keith's going to name his number five, and we're going to talk about them. We're going to go through our lists until we get to number one, the best gun enthusiast movie of all time. But before we get started, I want to be clear that we're basing these lists, because you can do this list in two kind of ways. You can do a list of like, what's your favorite fun shoot 'em up movie, which would be a completely different list and would not include the terrible movie Shoot 'em Up with Clive Owen on it. Or you can do a list of what are your favorite gun movies. And when we say that, we're talking about movies where you can tell that the technical consultants cared, the historical consultants cared, and the actors cared, so that the way they move, the weapons that they have, reflects that sort of passion for firearms that all of us dorkwads share. So I'm going to make Keith go first because I've already talked too much for this episode. So with that in mind, Keith, what's your number five?
My number five movie is one that a lot of people probably don't think of, and it's Hot Fuzz. I love
that movie.
Hot Fuzz. And the reason being is obviously it's a Sean Pegg comedy, and or Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. So it's one of their movies, and they clearly have just an absolute blast with it. But when you get into Hot Fuzz and you get into the whole crazy dude with a barn full of guns thing, he's just got loads of them, just absolute truckload of guns in here. But when you start looking at all the various makes, models, and etc., they're all England correct.
Mm-hmm.
So you have this little house in the country where they're like, everybody out here is packing. Everybody, all the farmers are packing, and all the farmers' mums are packing. And then he's like, "Oh yeah, like who?" And he goes, "Farmers. Who else? Farmers' mums."
Farmers' mums.
And then later down the movie, when Simon Pegg is coming back in after he kind of gets ousted by the cult, like he runs into a farmer who he then gets in a fight with, and then the farmer's mom comes out packing a gun. And but you look at all the Sterling machine guns and the L1A1 like English pattern FAL and all these, they're all British. They would all be English available weapons, and I just love the attention. They didn't just go to a warehouse that services weapons for firearms. They were like, well, if you ran into a weapons cache that had been being collected from like World War II to right now, what would you find in it? And they found everything, including a sea mine, which culminates the end of the movie. It explodes.
All right, so I absolutely love Hot Fuzz, and I always appreciated that same scene when they go into the armory and it's all like there's SMLE. That's Short Magazine Lee Enfield for you people who have no idea what the hell I'm talking about right now. And well, the other thing too, even the handguns that the main character ends up with are things that you would expect to find in kind of a wacko collection. Like there's a chrome PT92. It's not a Beretta. It's got a frame mounted safety. There's a chrome PT92. There's a lot of like Jerichos and DASA gun, and like weird Eastern European DASA guns.
All stuff that was very much able to be brought into England, especially when their firearms laws weren't quite as tight as they were now. This is stuff you would find. My favorite have to be the old Sten guns that they just like pick up and just start running around the supermarket with.
The little old lady's got, and the woman that he calls a hag, she's got a Sterling and she's trying to burn him down with that. And I'm like, where did you even get this? That gun's 60 years old, but it's great and I love it. My number five is a little bit different. It's a movie that is actually largely responsible for why I became a gun nut. And something that I've mentioned in other shows and before in the past is I was, when I was in high school, obsessed with the early colonial period. And we've had this conversation actually on a previous episode. And my favorite movie of that time is one that I have seen 1,000 times and can almost quote word for word, and that's Last of the Mohicans. And it is great. And it definitely fits into that category of movies where the technical consultant, who is someone that we both know, as well as the actor, Daniel Day-Lewis, who is a crazy person, and the guys who did the guns, they made sure all of the guns were period correct for that early colonial period. Daniel Day-Lewis actually learned how to load and fire a flintlock rifle, so that some of the stuff is a little wonky, like when he's reloading on the run by dumping powder into the gun. You could actually do that. It would make the gun work, just not a whole lot of times. But for the most part, everything in that movie is done in such a way that someone who understands how guns worked back then, you can buy it. It doesn't stretch credulity like you get in some other movies set in that period, like any John Wayne movie set in that time frame, for example, where you're like, that one, that's not the right gun. Two, no. So yeah, The Last of the Mohicans, I love that movie. That movie is why I bought a percussion cap rifle and was very, very responsible for sort of that was like my gateway drug into firearms, because I was like, ooh, black powder guns are fun. Ooh, guns that I can reload faster are even more fun. Ooh, and then the next thing you know, I'm a revolver degenerate. But yeah, for me, it's Last of the Mohicans, and it's just it's a great movie regardless of the gun stuff. But if you enjoy the attention to technical details and that sort of thing, and you for some reason are like one of the 7 people who haven't seen it, you should definitely check it out.
Moving on to number 4. Number 4 goes off the ship into the deep end and goes into that category of one that's just absolutely, utterly ridiculous. And I have to throw out that my number 4 is Commando. Arnold Schwarzenegger's Commando, because it takes absurd to such the 9th degree that you can't help but have fun with it. Nothing works this way. If you know anything about firearms, nothing works this way. But that does not interrupt my enjoyment of the Endless Magazine AK scene where he hits everybody any bit. I don't care. It's Arnold Schwarzenegger in Commando. He has a weird thumbhole stock AK and it never runs out of bullets, and I'm fine with that.
I think that's an RPK, actually. Like, I think that's what it's supposed to be. But
because it's got a 40 or 45. It's a really long mag in it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a 40, but it's got it might be I'd have to look it up on Firearms Movie Database, but I think it's a Mac 90 AK, and because it's got the poly thumbhole stock, and then he's got it over his shoulder, and then he's got that 4-rocket launcher, which is a real launcher, by the way. A lot of people don't. Yeah, a lot of people didn't think that was a real launcher. It's like that. No, that one actually is. They didn't mock that up. There was a real shoulder fired launcher that had 4 tubes like that.
According to IMFDB, which, good Lord, the pop-ups he's got going on right now. That is a Valmet M78.
Yeah, that's the one. Yep.
That's amazing. First off, that they had a Valmet. Like, where did Prop House get one of those? But that's rad. And so I love Commando. Like, it is, to your point. I think Commando is the perfect. It's the perfect example of the over-the-top 80s action movie. Like, the 80s action movie peaked with Commando, and there was never a better example of what an 80s action movie could or should be. I remember because there's a scene in it that's so patently ridiculous, like when he crashes into the Army Navy surplus store, and like in the back of the Army Navy surplus store, they've got unregistered machine guns and grenades and rocket launchers. And for me, watching that again as an adult, I had this moment. I'm like, do people think that's a thing? Like, where it's just, if you crash through the back of an Army Navy
they got the
store,
good stuff in the
that
back,
they've got a friggin' crate of unregistered M16s back there. That's not how this works, man. That's not how any of this works.
It'd be really nice if it did, but man, there's way more paperwork than that.
Oh, so much more paperwork. All right, so my number 4 is a little bit ridiculous, but mostly because it has Kevin Kline playing a cowboy. But my number 4 is Silverado. And if you haven't seen Silverado, it's a really, really great Western. It really, and if you like Westerns, it is a genuinely lovely sort of homage to Westerns. And it's written by the same guy who wrote one of the Indiana Jones movies and the guy who also wrote Empire Strikes Back. So it's good, and it has a lot of complex plot elements, and it's fun to watch. And it is not realistic in terms of the gun handling, because there's a lot of hip shooting and a lot of fast draw and stuff like that. But if you look at the gear that they're wearing at the time, it was sort of the peak of cowboy fast draw competition, like back when that was a thing that lots and lots of people did, and where there was like real money that could be earned making this. And Scott Glenn, who plays the main character, has a beautifully made cowboy fast draw style holster that is just like, it is not something a cowboy in the 1890s would have worn. It's cut like 3/4 of the way down the front. It looks like a race holster, but his technique for drawing and firing from this holster is extremely consistent with what was considered the best practices in cowboy fast draw competitions at the time. Why do I know this? Because I'm a fucking degenerate. That's why. And it was one of those things where, as a kid, I loved the movie because it had, great acting and good gunfights, and it has a very baby-faced Kevin Costner in it, who's got a beautifully made 2-gun rig. And then as an adult, as I learned kind of about the history of the shooting sports and where, how things had evolved, I suddenly realized that whoever their technical consultants for this movie were, I guarantee that those guys on their weekends went and shot cowboy fast draw, because the way they dressed the actors, the way they set up their guns, the way they set up their holsters was all very much built around that style of quick draw from the holster, fire a shot from kind of that like 90-degree index. And it's one of those things that makes me appreciate the movie more, because all of a sudden I can understand why they're doing these things that if you were trying to be period correct, you wouldn't do.
Because it added to the story. It didn't have to be historical in the context if you added to the story and you added to the storytelling. And I like people who are able to balance realism with the fact that their audience can suspend some disbelief and come along for the ride. And like Commando was an excellent example. Like, if you know anything about it, like you put that over here and you just have fun with it. But there's also a middle ground where you can have a very, very good story. You can have a very good progression of the narrative that's very accurate, but also take into elements that are going to enhance your storytelling, even if they weren't period correct.
Yeah, like there's a scene where Scott Glenn is shooting cactus needles off a cactus, and I at like 25 yards with an iron-sighted rifle, and I'm like, I don't care. This is cool, and it makes the story, and it works in the context of the story.
Exactly. All right, so we're on number 3 now, are we?
Yes.
Not? Yes, number 3. Number 3 for me, because this is one that got me into modern rifles, which is really my shtick. I love modern rifles. Was Black Hawk Down.
Oh, interesting. Not a movie I would.
The extended edition of Black Hawk Down, especially, which is almost 4 hours long, but it's a really good cut.
Interestingly, that's not a movie that I would think of when I think gun movies. I do not think of Black Hawk Down, because to me, there's nothing really remarkable about the guns. They're just, M16s and M4s, and stuff like that.
They're very simple, but it was the turning of the era where we were going away from what was the Vietnam era tech, and we are starting to get into what we recognize as modern tech. And unlike a lot of the 80s action flicks, and unlike a lot of the big budget, big explosion type action movies that were, lone hero with an infinite supply of hit points, takes on everybody, this was just as accurate portrayal as they could of what happened during Gothic Serpent when they lost 2 Black Hawk helicopters. Lots of dead, lots of injured during this raid to go get, these 2 warlord buddies of forget his name.
Oh God, yeah, the asshole, that guy.
Yeah, the asshole in Mogadishu. So they got the other assholes who were working for the main asshole, Adid, Mohammed
Yes.
Farah Adid. Yep, that's him. So you drop into Gothic Serpent and you see the Rangers, and they're running M16A2s, which was the first rifle I picked up in the military, was the M16A2. And then you see the Delta guys, and the Delta guys are running 733s, but they've got some cool guy stuff on it, but they've also got like flashlights duct taped to the rifles and everything like that.
Yep.
So you see a lot of
and that big ass Surefire.
Yep. So you see a lot of the ad hoc stuff that was just done because they knew it worked, but nobody had like come up with the permanent fix for this. No one had built it in. Like, we're spoiled as shit today with all our lock, and everything attaches to the rifle, and everything makes sense because it's all standardized and everything like that. And people don't realize that, like, that started to roll out around 98 with the M16A4 adoption and the Knights RAS and everything like that. Like, before that, it was really like, we'll try and come up with ways, but really those are plastic handguards, and this is an M4, M16, or a Colt 733. So, but the weapons handling in it was one of the first times I had stepped away from the stereotypical 80s action movie type flick and into something that was trying to be very realistic, very accurate. And so you got the scene where Ewan McGregor gets blown up for one of the first times, and like he's chilling out, and I forget the actor's name. Everybody's in that movie.
Yeah,
but he looks back at McGregor and goes, "Hey, Grimes, stay away from the wall." And you're like, "Wait, I know why, because bullets freaking travel down walls, so you don't want to hug a wall." And then he gets blown up, and the dude just kind of looks back real quick and goes, "Hey, Grimes, you okay?" "Yeah." His bells raised. He's just absolutely messed up. And this is like when he got attached as just an extra dude on these Delta guys, and they're rolling through, and they're like at that point in the movie, they're basically like, well, he's going to die halfway through, and we're just going to have to leave him somewhere. Then by the end of the movie, they're like, buddy team guys. And but it was just the entry into realistic gunplay with modern weapons, and that was one that was like, you know what, that was cool, because you see people doing all the realistic stuff, this stuff that privates and friggin' junior soldiers were taught to do with M16s and never really taught why, like smack a magazine on your helmet to see it around the rear and all this other stuff. And you're seeing it all go on, and then in the middle of that, you'd see like a dude pick up a severed hand and be like, well, we're going to need this later, and you dump it into dump pouch, and all kinds of just weird stuff that happens out there. And so, yeah, it was Black Hawk Down. Black Hawk Down's number 3 because very realistic gunplay, very realistic portrayal of soldiers, what they can do and versus what they can't do, because they were keeping an accurate body count throughout it. It's like everybody who went down in the movie went down in real life. So they didn't have to mock that up at all.
Yeah, I obviously I think everybody loves that movie, and there's the first time I saw it, I was shortly after I had joined the military for the first time. The second time I saw it, I was on Black Hawk, the company. One, they used to be cool. Two, they used to have an awesome bus, and they would take this bus to events. And I was on this bus with people from Black Hawk who may or may not have been in Operation Gothic Serpent. And we were watching this movie on the TV in their bus. And they were like, yeah, that happened, or yeah, that didn't happen. And I was just like,
but yeah, I remember that. You remember that?
Yeah, I was like, you did what with the what? Okay, well, alrighty then. I'm just gonna sit here and listen. That was a very fun time, and it has really always endeared that movie to me. Uh, it is interesting that you went with such a realistic choice for your uh, number 3 movie, because I am crossing into Fantasyland for number 3 and going with the unsurprising yet ubiquitous selection of John Wick 2. Not John Wick 1, not John Wick 3, John Wick 2. That's the best one. And it's also the best for the combination of gun handling that sets up being able to suspend disbelief when it comes to the number of hit points that John Wick has, because he's basically unkillable. And the reason why I like 2 the best, and 2 is the best from the gun handling perspective, is because his gun handling in John Wick 1 is good. It's solid. The fundamentals are there. He doesn't look overtly clowny. He moves okay. But after the runaway hit status that 1 was, they stepped it up for 2. The guns are better. The friggin' movement is better. And you cannot look me in the eyes and tell me that the 3-gun shootout in the catacombs is not one of the top 3 best gunfights ever captured on film, period, stop.
It is, without a doubt, it is.
You can make an argument that that's the best gunfight ever captured on film, full stop. And for me, the best part is when he just starts wrecking dudes with the shotgun, because my other thing that I like, in addition to revolvers, are shotguns. And when he's like, oh, these guys are wearing what I really liked about that scene is they sort of established in a weird way that shotguns wouldn't work great on the guys that were obviously wearing body armor, without saying it, because for whatever reason, when he switches to the gauge, all he does is like leg shot, face shot, leg shot, face shot. And I'm like, that would really fuck somebody up. Like, take a load of double-out buck to the thigh and then 1 to the grill. Yep, your day's over.
And anybody he's smoking in the chest at that point, because that's the shot he gets, he goes and he follows up with her. He finishes out. Like, he got one at close range, straight in the chest. That dude's down. And then he's like standing on him. He's like, all right, I got to put one in. Wham! Finishes him off. And it's like, you're acknowledging the fact that these guys coming at you are almost as good at you as you. These are realistic threats. It's not like the freaking Star Wars Episode 6 stormtroopers, where it's like, oh my God, you're getting beat up by teddy bears.
Like, first off, Ewoks are cannibals, savage warriors. And if you think about, like, how strong is a chimp at that size, right? Like, right. Ewoks probably have like chimp strength. Okay, just saying. I will defend the Ewoks here for a second. Are they ridiculous? Would the movie have been better if they were Wookiees? Yes, but sometimes you got to cut George Lucas a break. Yep. But back to John.
I'm not trashing on 6 there. It's just the fact that we had a sliding scale of danger there. And one of the things I hate, one of the sins I hate most in film, is a ridiculously easy bad guy because they're stupid or incompetent, yet somehow they're supposed to be like, we should fear you. Why?
Well, that was one of the things, as an aside, that always bugged me actually about Star Wars, is because stormtroopers in non-main Star Wars media, right? Like, if you're not watching any of the movies, if you're reading the books, but that got, turned into not canon, or even if you're watching like the Clone Wars show, like, the clone troopers are bad mamma jammas in the show.
They
and
are
stormtroopers
dangerous. They are
stormtroopers in the non mainstream movies are dangerous. They're, the stormtrooper is actually supposed to be like the equivalent of the Empire's Marine Corps. They're supposed to be like elite level troopers, and that is not reflected. Obviously, hero inaccuracies, blah blah blah, but that does bother me a little bit as well. But before we get to your number 2, my last thing on John Wick, and the reason why, again, I stand number 2 so hard, and I actually didn't enjoy, like, let me be clear, I enjoyed John Wick 3 because it's a great action romp shoot 'em up. But John Wick 3 required me to actually really ratchet up my suspension of disbelief way over what I had to do with John Wick 2. And if people who know the shooting sports probably all rolled their eyes as hard as I did when they were like 9mm major, and then he was shooting armored people with it. I'm like, the hell out of here with this.
Nope.
It's just a hot 9mm. It's like a 350.
Yeah, that's it. That's all you got. It's not changing the ballistic coefficient to something like 4.6.
Right. It's not like he was like
which is that
308
great.
Win Mag.
Yeah, you're not sitting there like, all right, 9mm major, 300 ruam. Here you go.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, but that's why John Wick 2 for me is one, the best John Wick movie, and also number 3 on my gun movie list. So what's your number 2?
Number 2, we're going to go back to John Wick, but we're going to encompass the series. So
Okay,
you and I
fair,
must be
fair.
really close on this. I will concur completely that John Wick 2 is the best of them. And it's because they balance very good gunplay with minimal suspension of disbelief. They didn't go out too far on a limb, despite the fact that, oh, secret cabal of assassins with all of this infrastructure in place and all this other stuff. You still didn't have to go too far out on the limb to enjoy the movie and say, no, I only have to suspend my disbelief just a tiny little bit to have a great time with this movie, because everything else feels a level of realism that I can get behind. But seeing the progression from John Wick 1, which was just a stupid, simple storyline that went very well because it was well run, and Keanu did a great job with the character and the detail there, into the John Wick 2 story, which was so rock solid that you were able to take the ridiculous elements of 3, which were, again, a really fun, shoot 'em up genre, but they're sitting there like, oh, he went to the desert with Halle Berry, and then he had to go on his spirit quest into the desert and find the Maharaja of assassin people, who I guess is just chilling in the desert as a nomad instead of
I don't know, in Shanghai or something.
Anywhere else. Like, I don't know, maybe he set up himself up as like a mega multi-billionaire in Dubai or something like that. Nope, he's just a desert nomad. So you had all those ridiculous elements, but still with a great action flick. And one of the things
could have done without the horse kicking people to death, though.
Yes,
that was for me. That was, I was like, okay, calm down. Like, could have done without the horse kicking, but other than that,
yeah. But the whole thing, especially with the firearms handling being so good, so clearly the element they were trying to get through, like they took it to the nth degree in 3, where it was very much like, okay, not only is the firearm handling going to be good, but tear and tactical product placement, product placement. Like, okay, I get so much product placement. So I have to give my number 2 to that series, the whole series, because you took a basic storyline, you knocked it out of the park, doing it well, doing the details right. And my favorite line is still from John Wick 1. And it's one of the 2 most expressive lines I've seen in artistic media. And it's Vigo, the dad. And like he calls up the car shop place.
Yes.
And he's like, hey, I heard you kicked out my son and you were disrespectful to him. He's like, well, yes, sir.
He stole John Wick's car and killed his dog.
Yep. And he's like, do you want to explain to me why you did that? Like, I'm about to bring the hammer of God down upon you and squash your little, chop shop away and just like murder everybody you knew because of the disrespect you showed me. That's how powerful I am. And he's like, well, sir, he stole John Wick's car and killed his dog. And he just turns profile to the camera and goes, oh, that is the most expressive single line.
That line does a better job of setting up John Wick as a badass than any other stuff they could have done in the movie.
No, they could have had a long, drawn out, like, look at all this action stuff, because other movies will do that. They'll have a montage of past events. Marvel's done that in a lot of movies, where here's a montage of the missions that Captain America went on. And this is why he and Bucky are so good friends, and they're badasses. And this was the team they were on, taking care of all this stuff. And that's how they set that up. But that single line, the fact that you have this friggin' mafia level boss who's clearly a crime family patriarch, and he's like, well, your son just fucked up big time. He made the big whoopsie. and he's just like, oh, just
yeah, no, that's great.
solidifies that this man is terrified of John Wick, and all we've seen of this guy so far is his wife died, he got a puppy. We're sad the puppy's dead because friggin' Theon Greyjoy is an asshole.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we were all happy that we got to watch Theon Greyjoy die, so that was good times. Yeah, no, I mean,
a better death in that movie than it was in the series.
It really was. You know, I can't disagree with that. I think that once you start getting into like these, you know, top 2 movies, it's very much like minute details, which for example, my number 2 is probably one that you have to be a real hardcore gun nut to even be aware of, but it's The Way of the Gun with Benicio del Toro and Ryan Phillippe. Anyway, with Benicio del Toro and Ryan Phillippe, and if you haven't seen it, it's perennially rotating around the streaming services. Just start Googling until you figure out which one it's on. But what makes the movie so good is, again, it's actually not that great a movie. I'm going to be honest. Like, if you're evaluating it, you know, in terms of movies like Last of the Mohicans or Heat, or it's not as good. The acting's not as good. The directing's not as good. But dear Lord, is that movie just a sappy love letter to Gunsight and the Weaver stance and 1911s and behind traditional IWB carry. The technical consulting on that movie is so good that it looks like they took Ryan Phillippe and Benicio del Toro and put them in a Gunsight and put them through the entire Gunsight curriculum that was available in 1989, and then was like, and now go do this movie, because they are perfect. They do such a great job with what at the time was the absolute pinnacle of defensive gun handling techniques. It's John Wick. It is the same level of technical proficiency that Keanu Reeves displays in John Wick 2 is on display with Benicio del Toro and Ryan Phillippe, just for, you know, like the late 80s, early 90s gun handling. And I will say James Caan's character, the Bagman, is my favorite character in the movie, and that has nothing to do with his insistence on carrying nothing but a 5-shot J-frame, which he reloads with speed loaders from his pockets, which is, again, to the credit. James Caan is actually a Gunsight graduate. Not a lot of people know that about him. He actually went to Gunsight to prepare for Thief, and learned a lot about gun handling there. This was back before studios would like hire people to come in and do this. And the way his character carries that J-frame, which, you know, just kind of carries it. He actually carries it appendix for a bit, carries it in a pocket, moves it around, and just reloads from loose speed loaders in his pocket, is very on brand for how that sort of character would carry a gun like that and would carry their reloads. So for me, yeah, it's got to be Way of the Gun at number 2. And Way of the Gun also, it does have some really, really quotable lines, like "There's always free cheese in a mousetrap," or my favorite, "Does this seem like a brains operation to you?"
That's right up there with Heath Ledger's "Do I look like a guy with a plan?" Exactly,
yeah. All right, so what's your number 1?
Number 1, I had to think about it because there are a lot of them, and I didn't want to be stereotypical, but B, I also wanted to be honest about it. And when I started looking at it from that, one came screaming right to the top, and that's going to be Extraction with Chris Hemsworth.
It's such a fucking good movie. I forgot that movie existed until just now.
Yes, it was. It was such a good movie, and it balanced everything I wanted out of a realistic side action shooter, because you take the most simple of action tropes, which is the washed up hero. You put a lot of modern elements into it, like PTSD from GWAT and you know, bad things happening around his life. He's not an invincible guy. You get that right off the bat. This dude's on prescriptions. This dude's on like antidepressant meds. He's drinking heavily. There's a chicken in the house.
There is a chicken in the house. That's a real thing in the movie.
And it's, yep. And so like he's clearly like living down on his luck in the backwoods of Australia, but also kind of trying to live his best life after the military, after, you know, his son died, which you get early on that like something happened to his son that was bad. But then you get the sense that he's a professional operator, he's a professional merc, and he's very good at what he does. You get that very early on. Then you have a lot of competing elements, and one of the things that I give the movie credit for is the gun handling is absolutely excellent. It's spot on,
phenomenal.
and not just spot on for Hemsworth, and I forget the Indian actor he was a part of, his foil in that he ends up teaming up with. But not only were they spot on, but like the Indian Army and the special forces, it was in, or wherever they were. I forget if it wasn't.
I think
India.
It was India. No, I think it was actually.
Yep. So like the military forces that are rolling in, they like those guys clearly know what they're doing too. So they're like rolling through with AKs in their shoulder. They're looking through the sights. They're room clearing in teams the way they should be. So instead of this sense of, you know, invincible good guy with unlimited hit points versus just clown level bad guys, everyone's a risk. So when he's hiding from dangerous people trying to pick him up, on top of the scene right at the beginning where he gets ambushed on the boat and they have to run back into town, and then he throws the kid back in the car and they start driving through town. It's an excellently shot series, and he's facing two very real threats at the same time. He's facing the cops and the military trying to catch his ass because he grabbed the kid and they want the kid back, and he's facing like the elite operator dude who was working for the kid's dad, who's trying to stiff the mercenary company on the fee because they can't pay it. They don't have any money. So he's like trying to like grab the kid real quick and be like, haha, no takesies, backsies, got him by. All the while the military's trying to get him back to establish the whole power base again that they had going. And it's just so competently shot. The entire sequence seems very gritty, very realistic. And as you're going through this, you know, Chris Hemsworth is taking damage. He's injured. Mm-hmm. He's like falling. He gets hit a couple of times in the vest so he can keep going. And then at the end of the sequence, like he hits the other dude with a truck after he's had the living snot beat out of him. They fall into a couple of floors. They're both in rough shape, and he just drives off beat to crap. And you're like, all right, well, he's got a lot of hit points, but he lost a lot of them.
Yeah.
No, so there was just great elements throughout the whole movie of great gun handling. They clearly cared about making it realistic. Reloads were realistic. And he's got some of the John Wick type gun handling going on, mm-hmm. but it's couched in both him and his opposing forces are much closer together. And him and the Indian dude he's facing off against are like neck and neck. They're evenly matched because he was this like special forces operator for India, and Chris Hemsworth was for Australia. And so they're like right there. And it's basically, all right, whichever of us gets in the lucky shot, that's what's going to happen. And the first lucky shot went to Chris when he hit the other guy with a truck. So,
yeah, I mean, you know, as ways to take a dude out, hitting him with a truck seems a lot more effective. So, you know, it's funny because I've only watched Extraction once, and it's one of those movies where I'm like, man, that was really good. I should sit down and watch it again. But I've discovered in this era of endless on-demand entertainment, I am way less likely to watch a newer movie multiple times than I am to sit down and watch an older movie that I saw at an earlier stage in my life multiple times, which interestingly is what brings me to my number one movie. And it is not a movie that most people would think of as a gun movie. It's much more of an adventure movie. It's the Brendan Fraser Mummy movie, the first one, not The Mummy Returns, which I also love. The Mummy Returns, I love it super hard, but I love The Mummy. And I love the way that in the movie, the guns are used as almost supporting characters. because the way that, there's in the beginning of the movie, Brendan Fraser's character is a part of the French Foreign Legion, and they have this gun battle with these Bedouins who turn out to not be Bedouins, blah, blah, blah. Watch the movie. If you haven't seen The Mummy at this point, you are listening to the wrong podcast. But anyway.
Don't you dare bring up the Tom Cruise one.
What Tom Cruise one? Tom Cruise made a Mummy movie? What are you talking about? Yeah, I know. That's terrible. I mean, they had scars in it, so I figured you would like it. But anyway.
I do love Scars, but there are better places for me to go see and enjoy Scars, and it's not that.
So, and Brendan Fraser's got these weird double action French revolvers that I actually found a used one, not one of those movie guns, but a used one in a store a few years ago, and regret to this day not buying it. He's got these great double action French revolvers that serve as sort of a character development bit for him. But one of the scenes that really sort of drives home his like casual badass adventuring character is when he unrolls his leather bound murder thing, and it's got his 1897 Winchester in it, and shotgun ammo, and 1911s, and more revolvers, and he's very casually like checking his guns. And Rachel Weisz, who plays Evie, who I still have a crush on, is like, do you think we're gonna need all of that? And he's like, we might. And it's such a fun movie. And the gun handling is done in such a way that, again, it's not super realistic, although I will say it is very reflective of how people would have shot at the time. Mm-hmm. When they're using shoulder fired weapons, they actually put them up into their shoulders and shoot them. They're using handguns. They use them with one hand because nobody shot with two hands in the 1930s. Or actually, that wouldn't even be in the 1930s. I think that's it. But anyway, regardless of that, it is done. The gun handling works for the period, but it works also in the context of an adventure movie, in the context of sort of that fun Indiana Jones style romp, where again, the guns are there to be a supporting character almost, and not necessarily be this super realistic thing. But because of how it's done, and because of some smart prop selections like the 1897 Winchester, mm-hmm. the weird French revolvers, the guns work, and they make it in, and they add a sense of fun and enjoyment to the movie that may not have been there if they had gone with some more vanilla choices.
Very, very much so. Because yeah, you have Rachel Weisz, and then you have like John Hannah's character, who's this weird, just like obviously the comic relief of it, because mm-hmm. he's always saying something weird. He's always trying to
Derringer.
And then like when it comes time to man the fuck up, he's just like, well, give me that rifle. I got this. And they're like, wait, you? And he's like, yeah, I was on the shooting team.
Oh, and the Lewis, that's in The Mummy Returns. Yep. The Lewis gun that the Egyptian guy, I don't know the actor's name, and I don't want to get his
Obed Fear plays in. Yeah.
So when he pulls the Lewis gun off the biplane and just starts walking around killing mummies with it, I'm like, I'm into this. We have because and that's one of those moments where again, it's sort of like why I don't mind. Here, perfect example. Him with the Lewis gun doesn't bother me, even though that's unrealistic, because the universe has constructed rules where there are mummies. So a guy single wielding a Lewis gun isn't entirely unrealistic to me. Nope. It's sort of like why, for me, Atomic Blonde doesn't work, because the action is set up to be too realistic and too gritty, and I don't buy Charlize Theron beating all that ass, even if it's set up from the point of an unreliable narrator. But a Black Widow movie will probably work, and the Black Widow character works because the Atomic Blonde universe is set up as being realistic. The universe where the Black Widow exists in has literal gods and people with magic hammers. So mm-hmm. I can buy a 110-pound woman beating the crap out of people in this, because I've already agreed that things are happening in this universe that don't happen.
Yeah, we're not tied to reality in the Marvel universe. So Black Widow can be as badass as we want her to be, because, oh yeah, by the way, Thor travels through lightning bolts, magic teleporter thingy, and he can just show up and he's on it. By the way, we had this dude collecting magic rocks who wanted to end half of life in the universe. That dude also exists in this universe, on top of every other big bad that they had to smash throughout the cinematic universe, from original Iron Man, where it was we made a bigger, angrier Iron Man suit, and that's what I'm going to take you on in there, Tony Stark, to like Thor Ragnarok, where he's like, he beats up the angry devil guy in the beginning, and then he has to fight his sister through the rest of the movie, and then he brings angry devil guy back, like, nope, he's going to end the world, but he's going to end you too. Have at it, you two. Like, that's part of the universe there.
And that's why, to bring this back to guns and to wrap up this episode, that's why I was never mad at Scarlett Johansson using Glock 26s in the first Avengers movie, because, hey, we're just accepting that this isn't reality here.
Mm-hmm. And they poke fun at it. Like you in Age of Ultron, you run into Hawkeye and he's like, yeah, and I have a bow and an arrow.
We're fighting robots on a flying island.
I have a bow and arrow. None of this makes sense.
Oh yeah. I think Hawkeye is the most based character in those films. But anyway, guys, that is it for this episode. We will be back with a new episode next week. So thank you everybody for listening. Keith, do you want to thank our sponsors that pay us to have this show?
Absolutely. We have, as usual, Aero Precision. We have DeSantis Gun Hide, and we have the wonderful Rocky Brass, that if you're looking for those elusive 80% right now, they occasionally have those in stock there. Occasionally, on occasion, got a ghost guns. So terrifying. Who are you going to call? Rocky Brass.
Call Rocky Brass for all your gun needs. All right, guys, we will see you next week.